welcome back. Now, today we're talking about the safety and security concerns for journalists and media workers in general, and particularly for women working in the industry. Now, last month, Associate Professor in the Media Studies Department at the University of the Witwatersrand, Glenda Daniels, wrote an article asking whether the killing of journalists and photographers in South Africa is becoming a trend. Now, we're joined by three women in the media space who need absolutely no introduction. SABC senior reporter Chriselda and Karyn Maughan is a legal journalist at News 24, and of course Professor Glenda Daniels, writer, author, researcher, lecturer, and as I said, they need very little introduction. Ladies, thank you so much for joining us here on Morning Live.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Professor Daniels, let me start with you, just in terms of journalism and how it has evolved, especially looking into the almost 3 decades since the advent of democracy in South Africa. How have things changed, and especially as it pertains to the safety of journalists?
So, Sakina, that's a fantastic starting point, because at the outset of democracy, which is our fabulous victory, journalists were feted and everyone wanted to be with them, and journalists were given open access to everything. And Mandela said the most fantastic words about media freedom being the lifeblood of any democracy. And in fact, history has shown us there's always a backlash. The minute we get victories and the minute we have successes as women, whether it's on the gender front, whether it's on the race front about non-racialism, whether it's about democracy or media freedom, there's also a backlash. And we are beginning to see this as the powers that be tend to get insecure about their power because they haven't delivered what they're supposed to deliver, of course. The people who are actually telling the truth and holding power to account are the ones who are going to be performing this backlash, and who we are seeing right now doing exactly that. The journalists are the enemy. So what the ruling party would like is for us all to be at one with each other and all to have one view, and therefore everything would be okay in a democracy. Well, it doesn't work that way, as we can see. Indeed, as you introed on the topic for today, the most vulnerable then become women, because they think women are easy to shut up because they are vulnerable. You know, we can slash their tires, or we can harass Karyn Maughan, from the work she's doing, which is what journalists do. And they will get so intimidated, they will self-censor, they'll hold themselves back, and they won't say things as they're supposed to be said. So that's the main backlash that we're seeing, is against women journalists.
So let's take it to the field, right on the beat, Karyn. So talk to us about, your sentiments in terms of being a woman on the front line in this instance, and whether you feel safe in contemporary South Africa doing your job.
Well, I think the fact of the matter is that, when I was the target of the private prosecution by the former president, I had to go into court with bodyguards, and when I was covering the court, we had to, actually going to do my job, I had to have bodyguards. I don't know if that's going to change in the immediate future, but certainly the degree of the threats that I was facing, made News 24 rationally believe that it would be unsafe for me to go into that courtroom to do my job without a bodyguard. And that, for someone who's been working in this industry, for 2 decades, it was jarring. I think what also is incredibly debilitating, and I mean, Chriselda will speak to this, is the degree of social media harassment of female journalists, and you yourself know. Unfortunately, we are in a time and place where harassment of people on the internet is very common, but female journalists are a lightning rod. And the kind of abuse that we face isn't just in terms of our work, it's in terms of who we are as women. So you will have someone, for instance, saying to me, you're going to go to jail and you're going to get raped in jail. And Chriselda knows this. I mean, we face these violent, absolutely abhorrent things. And, you know, what Glenda was speaking to about self-censorship, I will rewrite a tweet 5 times because you're so scared. You're literally preempting, oh, this is what they're going to say, this is what they're going to do, how am I going to protect myself? And so that anxiety suffuses your work, and your ability to be able to sort of grapple with ideas, to immediately express yourself is undermined because you fear what you know is coming, and what is going to come is the backlash.
So, Chriselda, in as much as one recognizes what the intention is, as Karyn says, you reread whatever it is that you try to put out, and you know that chilling effect obviously does come into play. So let's talk about the sort of harassment, you know, the sort of unsafe situations that you've been faced with.
It's become so common, so common on social media for the bullying to be so excessive. We're threatened with rape. We're threatened with having someone follow you. You're threatened simply for doing your job. Simply for doing your job. And we can't find ourselves in a country so many years into democracy where we are conveyors of information to the public. I understand there may be this trust deficit, Glenda, that perhaps you know, the university has probably looked into in terms of studies, trust deficit between communities and journalists. But to threaten people with rape, to threaten people with violence, to threaten people with assault, simply cannot be accepted. We're also seeing in some communities where if you don't push a certain narrative, they try to force you to push a certain narrative. We've become targets in communities where we're simply trying to be that conveyor belt of information. You want to hold politicians to account? You can't call the media, you want to be covered. You come there, you stone our vehicles. Our colleagues are getting injured on the job. We're not being crybabies, but to threaten someone with rape and to threaten someone with assault, to threaten them with violence, all in the name of them doing their job. Journalism is not a crime. For colleagues to have to walk around with bodyguards, it's totally and I've not seen enough condemnation about it. I've not seen enough condemnation about it.
So
even from the industry.
Where would you like to see that from? You know, Chriselda, when you say we haven't seen enough condemnation.
Well, at SANEF, Chriselda
has done a lot. Yeah.
We seem to spend our lives doing statements on a day-to-day basis. And I know a lot of people in the industry say, well, so what? You know, your statements are not enough. But when Karyn is in court fighting, you know, what she shouldn't be fighting, she shouldn't be in court at all. We are there, and we have done pickets and, you know, helped with a legal case, etc. So there's only so much an organization can do. But what we are doing is to put it out there that this is happening. And SANEF itself gets a barrage and a torrent of abuse because of the work that we do. It's community service. It's what we believe in. We dedicate it to the cause because we dedicate it to the cause of democracy. It really, I mean, as you were saying, you know, journalism is not a crime. It's there for everybody in this country to be getting the information they need, to be making the decisions and choices they need to make when they vote, for example. They need to have, we can't and we must never become a country such as Venezuela, China, Zimbabwe, where they put journalists in jail. At the moment, we don't have that. I'm saying at the moment because I'm a cynic, of course.
Yeah.
You know, at the moment, we don't have journalists in jail, and the journalist killings that we've had, I named a few in the story, they can't be proven as yet that they were killed because of the job they did. The suspicions are there. And the one journalist who was killed in 2013, Michael Shelley, for what he was doing was taking pictures of a broken pipe in Motlong Brits in the northwest. And the community members said he was shot by a Marikana policeman. The police said he was caught in the crossfire. In the end, he actually, that former policeman was actually put in jail for 15 years because, in fact, he was killed by a policeman. So You know, those kind of incidents, we can't let them go. We can't just say, oh, coincidentally that happened and coincidentally that happened. And you put too many coincidences together, you begin to find a trend that's happening. So the reason why this discussion in itself is very important is we have elections coming up. Within months, we have elections coming up. And journalists are going to be targets again. We need to get the government to actually do something, to say so. It can't just be SANEV. I mean, SANEV is, you know, a disclaimer, I'm there as SANEV's Gauteng convener, but it can't just be SANEV on its own. That's the one that's saying things. It has to be everybody. You know, we have lots of civil society organizations, and they're very important too. And we need public support for journalists. When something happens to a journalist, we need the publics also to be outraged about it. We need media itself to be doing something. We can't, as media, say we can't write about ourselves. We can't talk about ourselves. We can't have shows about ourselves. We actually can, and we should.
And a very important point, picking up on elections, because this being, I suppose, likely to be the most contested since our advent to democracy, is going to bring up all sorts of things, and we know how it goes during election season. But Karyn, perhaps this is also an opportunity to take the public into our confidence and say, well, you know, these are the actual threats that have led to the situation where I need bodyguards. How did this happen? You know, what sort of threats are being made against you specifically?
Well, I mean, I think that there's been, you know, certainly in our application, which we bought to have the private prosecution thrown out as an abuse, we used a lot of the tweets that particularly emanated from the former president's daughter in terms of, you know, making reference to a journalist in Sri Lanka who had been beaten up by members of the public because of fake news. And she said, come look here, sort of like open indication that this should happen to me. You know, there were a lot of comments about sexual violence. There were a lot of comments about, you know, like sort of white bitch, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of kind of violent sexual references, which I don't really want to get into. But it escalated to such a degree that, you know, I had to sort of stay with my parents. And because I'm a type 1 diabetic, my actual physical condition became very impacted. And I started going into sort of diabetic comas quite frequently, to the point where my own mom had to inject me with glucose to save me from potential death as a result of that. And I think that, you know, I know for myself, and I know for Chriselda, people want to believe that you're impenetrable, that it doesn't affect you, but it does. It gets to you, it inhibits you psychologically. And for myself, I've sort of developed quite crippling anxiety, you know, for quite a number of months now. I find it difficult to go out and be in public because I'm scared that someone's going to shoot me in the head, because people have said, we will shoot you in the head, we will drive a car into you, etc. And I think that one of the things that I've tried to sort of take away from it, you know, our mutual friend Eusebius, he said to me, you know, not everyone is entitled to your trauma, but don't be afraid to express it in places where you feel safe, and express that in vulnerability. Because I think people don't see us as human beings. They want to make out that we're either angels or devils. So you either get showered with praise or heaped upon with abuse. But in the end of the day, we are people. And as Chriselda says, we are just trying to do our jobs. We didn't get into this job to be in the limelight. We just got it because we were curious and we wanted to tell stories. And just treat us like human beings with the same degree of respect that you treat any other human being, and understand that we are trying to do our jobs the best way that we can, and we shouldn't be heaped with abuse and death threats because of that. It's just not appropriate.
And I want to talk about how we then conscientize the public at large to the fact that they don't have to agree with what journalists say, but you know, this is the story. You can agree, disagree, like, dislike, it doesn't really matter. But it is the journalist's responsibility to actually bring the story to the fore. Chriselda?
And especially with the social media and the spread of disinformation, it's made it so much easier. And unfortunately, there are sectors of society that would believe things just because they're on social media.
Yeah.
Then you have the truth versus what someone else has spread, which is absolutely untrue. I've seen videos of yourself, of colleagues Francis Heard, where those are not things that you said, but they're distorted deliberately for it to do or to have a certain effect. So look, social media is here. There's nothing that we can do about the digitization of the world and where we're going. But we have to be very careful about and understand the seriousness and the damage that disinformation does. Because when that is put on a platform, there are people who believe those things. How do we deal, I guess, with the issues of disinformation? I think Media Monitoring Africa has had quite a number of discussions on this. SANEF has also spoken about this quite often. And, you know, unfortunately, this is where we are. But journalists cannot be stopped from doing their jobs. It's simply not going to happen. We might as well all just take the key and close this building, close the News 24 building, close Eyewitness News' building. And that simply cannot happen. There are communities that rely on the voices that we give them in order for them to hold power to account. And when there are challenges that they're facing, they're hoping that our microphones, our pens, our notebooks will be able to fix what is so wrong in society. So irrespective of what is happening, and, you know, in particular, other women will also tell you about the challenges that they're facing in the media industry, and you'll be shocked. I mean, Sakina, you're not spared to any of that on social media as well. You don't respond as often as I do, but...
well, I don't respond. That's the stance I've taken. I do not engage. Yeah.
So I tend to engage sometimes because, you know, some might frown upon that sometimes, but there are issues where you can't. If you're not going to be protected by... obviously, the SABC can do so much in order to protect me, but if it goes to a certain degree and or to a certain level, there's something that I have to do to protect myself. Because you go about spreading disinformation and saying untruths, which others will believe are true. And in particular about women, violent and vile.
And sometimes totally deliberate. You know, I remember waking up one Sunday morning to a deliberate distortion on the Twitter feed. And this is by somebody who is in a position of power, who knows it's not true, who ultimately then says, nah, I know it's not, you know, but this whole thing had taken up the better part of my Sunday.
Which
just
is your
trying
rest
to,
day. Yes, exactly.
you know, just trying to set the record straight, Glenda. So what sort of protections should we have in place? Because journalists are held to a certain, you know, code of ethics. You know how you have to abide by a certain set of rules. The Twitter journalists don't. The citizen journalists
don't. Well, they're not journalists. People on Twitter are not journalists.
Well, they are called, that's what they are called colloquially.
You see, that's the thing. And then there's this collapse and conflation, illusion of journalism with Twitter. And for me, I don't see it as the same thing. Social media is social media. It's out there for everyone to participate, and it seems to be a vile space. A really, really vile space of binary oppositions. There's no nuance on Twitter. This is it, and then this is not it, and then the two divided worlds, and it's ugly out there. And it's exactly the space and exactly what the three of you are saying about why women now don't engage, you know, or hardly. Sometimes you do, but hardly engage because there is this backlash, because people can. So underlying all this is a terrible sexist society, not just in South Africa, around the world, because women are meant to shut up. It's like the space for voice. I mean, if you think about media and journalism, voice, it's always been about men. Men have the loudest voices, literally, and they've always had their place at the table. And then when women are talking, they tend to cut them off or steal their stories, or, you know, it's just that kind of thing where that's the kind of world we always have lived in. And then when we get, for example, with women in media, women were not editors 30 years ago. You know, we were all journalists then. We were running around as reporters in newsrooms. And then there was this great celebration, in fact, around, say, 10 years ago, where there were 50% of newsrooms had women editors. And now we're seeing that number decrease. So I'm not saying, of course, media is sexist too. But
it's
everywhere in the
sexist.
world where you get, yeah, exactly. So everywhere in the world where you get these victories and gains for women, for social media in itself is a gain because it's meant to be a leveling of the playing field. Media is not just for people who are known out there, who can write. Now everyone can contribute. So it's media, it's social media. So people who are now tweeters, thinking of themselves as journalists, not abiding to the code of ethics, we have a regulation system. They don't have to get the right to reply. They can do whatever they like. And so there is no solution at the moment, and if ever there will be, to how one regulates the space of social media, the checks and balances, because there are millions, gazillions upon tweets happening all over the world at a rate none of us can keep track of. So it's just about people's own responsibility to be not doing the racist and the sexist and the sexual violence thing on social media. And of course, that's not going to happen. So, you know, in the end, what happens is women say, well, I'm not even going to put my story out there because there's going to be a reaction. There's going to be somebody, you know, like in Karyn's case, talking about, oh, you're diabetic, you should die or whatever. There have been such vile things said about you, and you've been strong, actually, against it to withstand it, including with
Chriselda, that's the point,
and
isn't
including
it?
with you.
We shouldn't have to be strong.
We shouldn't have to be.
No. And you know what the most amazing thing is that in all of this, I will tell you that the biggest voices in support of me have been people like Chriselda, Ferial Haffajee. It's been all women. And I think that's one of the interesting points, is why are the men not standing up and saying, why are you saying this vile language to this woman? It's all women who are fighting for other females. And I think that's one of the biggest things, is that we are like, it's that language of you must be strong like a rock. Nonsense. I'm a human being. And, you know, it's oftentimes females like Ferial Haffajee who will, Chriselda will come out and fight for her colleagues. You know, we'll see like someone like Slee Masakado who was like subjected to unspeakable abuse when she was just doing her job during, you know, those demonstrations and literally being told, you can't come here, barred, that kind of thing. And it needs to be not just women speaking up for women, but men actually coming and saying, this is unacceptable, you don't speak like this, and you must stop.
Chriselda, we're out of time, 30 seconds.
Absolutely.
Look, I think more needs to be done. You know, Glenda did say we don't know what is going to be done in the next couple of years, but very sad because I think, you know, even colleagues like, I think it's Thulasizwe Simelane previously, he's not on Twitter, he's just decided to leave the platform. I've considered leaving the platform because it simply doesn't work for me. If I tell my employer that I'm not going to go there and allow myself, but that does such a disservice to other people that we need to serve. And you backtrack again and think, actually, I'm not going to do that. Do what you must, but we're not going to stop doing our jobs.
I think we need more time to, you know, delve into other avenues around this particular discussion because we've only but scratched the surface this morning. But thank you so much to our guest this morning, Glenda Daniels, Associate Professor in the Media Studies Department at the University of the Witwatersrand, News 24 journalist and legal commentator Karyn Maughan, and of course our very own SABC News reporter Chriselda Lewis, speaking to us about the good, the bad, and of course the ugly side of working in the media, and especially around safety and security concerns for media workers. It's 8 o'clock. Let's take a look at what's making the news headlines.